and welcome back. My name is Vidi for those of you who are new here. January was such a long month and it feels like it has been forever since I read these books, but we are finally reviewing the books that I read for January. So not much of an intro, you already know the drill. Let's go straight into my statistics. Per usual, I have my iPad right here with me. This month I read a total of 7 books. 2 of them were fantasy, 3 of them were romance, 1 was a historical fiction, and 1 was fiction. In total, I read 3,426 pages. Okay, so starting off strong, the first book that I read for January and finished almost immediately, and that is Pen Pal by J.T. Jessinger. I read it on my Kindle. I would absolutely recommend to go into this book blind. It is labeled as a dark romance, so of course also look at the triggers. If you do want to go into this book blind, go ahead and skip this whole review if you want. But for those of you who want to know a little bit more about it, this book, like I mentioned, is a dark romance, follows our main character Kayla. She is a recent grieving widow. She's coming back from the funeral of her husband when she receives a letter from prison. She has no idea who it is. She's intrigued, so she starts answering back. This is all happening while at the same time she's trying to go through the motions of grieving her husband. Her house also seems to be falling apart, so she calls a handyman. The handyman comes, checks out her house, but there's this kind of like attraction, instant attraction between the two, and it kind of just follows the story of Kayla navigating her grief, navigating what it means to be a widow, as well as having to figure out this attraction that she has to this handyman. To make things a little bit even more confusing, you throw in Dante, who is the person mate that she's receiving letters from. So that's kind of like the gist of the story. It sounds confusing, and it is confusing. I had absolutely no idea what was going on. I felt as distraught as Kayla did. Obviously, like, not the grieving part, but I was just so confused. I could feel her emotions. I'm just like,
oh my god, what is going on?
But I feel like this book is definitely not what you expect it to be. There is this dark romance twist to it, of course. We do have some very spicy scenes. This is a very spicy book in my opinion. It is categorized as a dark romance and it is dark, but it is not the kind of dark romance that you expect it to be. It's also not lighthearted at all. It is again about a grieving widow. And if I'm being very blunt, the characters felt a little flat to me. I think it was just the confusion of what was going on in the book that kept me reading and kept me engaged and interested in what was happening. Just to not try to like spoil too much of the book, like I said, if you're interested, go for it. Definitely look into the trigger warning list, but I will be rating this book a 3.5 out of 5, and as for spicy, I'm going to give it a 3 out of 5. So the book that I picked up after that was The Great Alone by Kristen Hanna. The Great Alone follows a family, Ernst, who was in the Vietnam War and was a POW. He obviously comes back with trauma, has a hard time trying to get back into his life. He decides that he's going to move his family, his wife, Cora, and their daughter Lenny to Alaska. At first, Cora and Lenny are a little bit apprehensive. Lenny is tired of going to new schools. This is all told in the perspective of Lenny, by the way. She's just going along because she's a child and there's not much she could do. They moved to Alaska, and at first Alaska is beautiful. It's a new start. However, they keep getting warned about the winters and preparing for the winter. This is another one of those books where please look at the triggers. I feel like any Kristen Hanna book, just kind of look at other people's reviews and any triggers, because this does cover heavy subjects such as like abuse, broken families, PTSD. So there is definitely a lot going on here that could be very, very triggering to people. Kristen Hanna's way of writing is beautiful. She has amazing writing. I love her writing, but she writes about some very heavy topics is what I'm noticing. And I knew picking this up, I was going to be sad. I knew what kind of book I was getting myself into when reading this. That doesn't make it any easier. So definitely take care of yourself when reading this book. I really loved seeing it all from Lenny's perspective, because again, it's the perspective of a child growing up. I feel like these topics are hard to write about and talk about, but they still need to be talked about. But yeah, I really did thoroughly enjoyed this book, even seeing how hard it was to read some parts. So I'm going to rate this a 4.5 out of 5. So after that, I definitely needed a pick-me-up. I got Hopeless by Elsie Silver. This is the final installation to the Chestnut Springs series. The story is about Bo and Bailey. So Bo is the middle brother of the Ethan family. He was in the military, and when MIA came back, now has to deal with having to figure out what his identity is after being in the military. He doesn't really feel like he fits into his community, and he just is having a hard time accepting praise that he's getting and stuff like that, and he just needs someone to see him for who he is. Insert Bailey, who is the pariah of the town. No one really likes her because of her family, because of her brothers. Eventually, a kind of unique bond starts to form between Bo and Bailey. This has age gap tropes, fake dating, fake marriage / marriage of convenience kind of trope. It is the final book to the Chestnut Springs series, so in a way it's also an extended epilogue for other characters in that series. It's definitely more of a lighthearted book, even though it does still talk about trauma and PTSD and stuff like that. It doesn't go in as deep, so don't expect it to be life-changing necessarily. It's more of a fluffy, spicy little book, a lot more uplifting, has a happily ever after, and is a good wrap to the overall Chestnut Springs series. We know what we're getting when we're reading Elsie Silver. So overall, I'm rating this book a 4 out of 5, and for spiciness, I'm rating it a 2.5 out of 5. I will definitely be reading more Elsie Silver. She is definitely a comfort author for me. After that, I was really feeling a fiction book, so I picked up Here One Moment by Leanne Moriarty. This story follows multiple people. It follows these people that were all in this plane that got delayed. At some point in the plane, this older lady gets up, she's kind of like in a trance, and starts going up to people and telling them how they're going to die and at what age they're going to die. It just kind of follows the story of not only the people who got this prediction, but also the person who made this prediction, and it's just literally just a story about life and how fragile life is, and kind of reminding you of your own mortality. It is a really beautiful book. The writing is absolutely amazing. It made me want to go to Australia. It's not necessarily a thriller. It sounds like a thriller, and it could be categorized as a thriller because of this aspect of death, but it's not scary. It's not dark necessarily. It's just more life. I had compared it to Manifest when I first received this book, which does still have a similar feel in the sense that fate is tied into everything, but it doesn't have that action thriller kind of feeling necessarily. Honestly, if you guys want a little bit more in-depth video of how I felt about it, go watch my reading vlog. Very, very amazing book. I really loved it, and it is the first 5-star book of the year. I definitely gave this a 5 out of 5. I would completely recommend to anyone and everyone. I feel like it's a good reminder of what life is. Yeah, really good book, beautiful writing. The book I picked up after that is Butcher and Blackbird by Brynne Weaver. This is a reread, and this is the first book of my in-person book club that I'm in. So this story is supposed to be a dark romance. I'm saying supposed to because it's not necessarily dark. It's more of a dark rom-com. It is a lot more lighthearted than a usual dark romance, with still some triggers here and there, so definitely look at the trigger list. There is one at the beginning of the book. So the story follows two serial killers, Sloane and Rowan, and they kind of find comfort in each other and decide, hey, we're going to make this game, and they do this annually. Kind of just follows the story of Sloane and Rowan in this game, and like a friendship starts to blossom from there. So that's kind of the gist of the story. I read this less than a year ago around summertime, and unfortunately I read it after ACOTAR, and I was coming from such a big high from ACOTAR that picking up this book felt like I was falling into a reading slump. I felt like I didn't give it a fair chance. So I did say I was going to try to read it again. It was the first book for the book club, so I'm just like, this is a sign. I need to read it, especially since I got the second book. I definitely feel like I enjoyed it the second time around. I still really enjoyed the banter. That's something that really did stand out to me when I first read the book. I really like Rowan too. He's like this golden retriever serial killer kind of person. I like the space and the way he approached his feelings towards Sloane and just kind of allowing things to like blossom naturally without forcing himself into her life, especially because obviously there's also traumas and stuff like that they both carry. They both have a lot of baggage, and I really enjoyed Sloane's kind of like growth because she is a very anxious person and she only feels confidence when she is in her kind of like serial killer mode. I did really enjoy the characters. It is all still very surface level because it is a rom-com, a dark rom-com, so there's not a lot of depth into it. Something I did wish was that we kind of discussed a little bit more of the traumas because I feel like it kind of just brushed over it, but again, because it is such a lighthearted book, I kind of understand why we didn't. Another thing I do wish was that we got to see more of Sloane being this badass character, because we always cut to after she has captured the people, and I'm just like, I might not want like a detailed version, but she's a small thing that takes down pretty big serial killers. Like, I'm genuinely curious as to how she does this. Like, she has to be very clever or very strong to be able to do some of these things. I just wish we had a little bit more scenes like that. But other than that, I definitely enjoyed myself a lot more. The writing is very flowery for what kind of book it is. So overall, I'm going to rate this book a 3.5 out of 5 this time around, and as for spice, I'm going to say a 2.5 out of 5. Some questionable things happen in this book. So the book I read after that, I also read this one on my Kindle, and this was for an online book club, and that's Anathema by Carrie Lake. Okay, first of all, I am very sorry for everyone who had to hear me pronounce it Anathema, but I am first a Spanish speaker, so when I don't know words, I pronounce them the way they are spelled, and my Spanish mind is anathema, not anathema, so I'm very sorry. Anyway, this is a fantasy book, a romantasy book. It is a gothic fantasy romantasy book. So this story follows Maybeth, who is kind of like the pariah of town. She was abandoned as a baby in front of these woods called the Eating Woods, and was just seen as like a bad omen, and she was picked up by this family. Eventually, the grandfather and the father passed away, and now they're kind of at the mercy of the grandmother, who is just like terrible. Maybeth is just having like a terrible time, especially when she wakes up one day and someone's trying to kill her. It's a crazy story. There is a lot of world building because there is so much world building. It is very slow for maybe the first 20% to like half of the book, if I'm being honest, if you are not into world building. I really enjoyed myself. There was so much new vocabulary because it's a lot of world building, and that does make it kind of difficult to read because it's a lot of made-up words that you've never heard. But eventually in the second half, the romance kind of kicks in if you're really into that romance aspect. I personally felt like the romance could have been a little bit more subtle, but it is a slow burn. It ends in a kind of weird way. I'm not sure how I feel about the ending, but the overall writing style and everything I really enjoyed. It felt very poetic, and again, it's another very flowery kind of writing. I keep saying flowery. I just mean like poetic. The writing is absolutely beautiful, but because it is so poetic and like it does have all this like gothic feel, sometimes that's not for everyone. If you do give it a chance, I really do recommend it. Yeah, I think I would have liked to focus more on the overall arching plot instead of the romance, and have the romance be more of a subplot. But at least in this first book, after the world building, the romance feels like the main plot. And because of all the world building, I thought there was going to be more to the overarching plot. I don't know if I'm making any sense. Point is, I enjoyed myself. I really like this book, and I'm actually very excited for the second book. So overall, I'm gonna rate this book a 4 out of 5. As for spice, I'm going to say a 2 out of 5. Okay, and the last book that I read for January is Iron Flame by Rebecca Yarros. I will be giving a more in-detail review with spoilers in a different vlog. I think it's going to come out maybe at the end of this month. Iron Flame is the second book to the Empyrean series. This one comes after Fourth Wing. Without spoiling too much, it's just following Violet and what she's discovered. That's all I can say without spoiling anything. My feedback for this book is that it was way too long, considering that half of the book focuses on romance and miscommunication, and it could have been shortened so much more if that wasn't the case. Like, this book is really long for what it actually is, and I feel like a lot happened with like nothing really actually happening, just like a few important things that did happen that like moved the plot along. With that said, there's also a lot of new information kind of just thrown at you, and I'm not sure if that was just to kind of explain the world a little bit bit better now that Violet knows a little bit more. I don't know if I'm dumb. But I did not understand a lot of it. I had such a hard time understanding what things meant or how they worked. So that made it a little bit confusing. I love the dragons. Andarna. I love Andarna. I wish there was more dragon time. This is the same feedback I had for the first book. I also wish we explored a little bit more outside of Bascaias, which we did. We did a lot more in the second book, but not as much as I thought we would. And without spoiling the ending was, yes, impactful, but I didn't feel like it was too much of a cliffhanger because of the reactions or because of the point of views that we saw. I didn't feel like I was going to die if I didn't have the next book like I thought I was. But I think my general feedback is that it's too long of a book. I don't like a lot of the tropes that are thrown in there, and I think it was just Fourth Wing had the appeal of it being a new world with dragons and challenges and all that stuff that this one just did not feel the same. Overall, I'm going to rate this a 3 out of 5. As for Spice, I'm going to say a 2.5 out of 5. Yeah, those were all the books I read for January. If you read any of these books, or you're interested in reading any of these books, or you have any book recommendations for me, leave a comment down below. I will forever take book recommendations. I really appreciate those. They really help me kind of get out of my comfort zone and out of genres that I usually read. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you haven't done so already and you're interested, please subscribe. I make more book content, and now and then, sometimes I like to do vlogs. Don't do them as often anymore. But yeah, that's it. Thank y'all so much for watching. Have a beautiful day, and I will see y'all next time. Bye-bye.